They have always existed, lurking in the shadows just beyond the reach of everyday life, where darkness swallows all hope and fear becomes a constant companion. Hidden from history's pages, their stories buried beneath layers of silence and terror. Until one fog-filled night in Victorian London, the world finally gave these nameless horrors a title that would echo through the ages. Jack the Ripper. That name, simple, chilling, immortal, etched itself into the collective nightmare of humanity. It symbolized a predator from the depths of human depravity, stalking the most vulnerable through the gaslit alleys, slashing life away with cold, calculated cruelty. But this was not a story limited to London's shadowy past. No, this darkness lives on, takes new forms, and moves silently through the hearts of cities and across continents. Jack the Ripper was not unique. He was the first known expression of an ever-present evil that has thrived in humanity's forgotten corners, beyond justice and daylight. These killers are timeless, creatures as old as the first blood spilled in rage and hunger, still active as the blades they wield, as persistent as the ropes that strangle the breath from their victims. Like nature's oldest terrors, earthquakes that shake the foundations of civilizations, tornadoes that tear through everything blindly, these killers rage uncontrollably, reborn over and over. Their rise is unpredictable, impossible to prevent, and their thirst for destruction unquenchable. This is the story of such a darkness, how it manifested in a distant land under the Iron Curtain, how monsters emerged from the depths of Soviet Russia, and how their names now haunt the collective memory as chillingly as Jack the Ripper himself. In the vast frozen expanse of the Soviet Union, a land cloaked in secrecy and rigid order, a darker chaos festered beneath the surface. Over the course of 2 decades, dozens of monsters emerged from the shadows, killers whose twisted acts shattered not just lives but the fragile trust of entire communities. These were not the faceless criminals of cold statistics. They were names whispered in fear, shadows lurking behind locked doors, and behind the veils of communist propaganda, a reality too horrid to speak of openly. Yet their brutality was undeniable, marking the Soviet wilderness and cities alike with scars of unspeakable violence. In Moscow during the 1970s, the city streets knew a horror draped in red, a killer stalking women, merciless and elusive. His victims' fate sent chills through the hearts of those who dared walk alone after dark. Farther south in the endless Kazakh steppes, the terrifying figure of Young Aliyev earned the chilling nickname, the Vampire. His hunger for power and violence drained the lives of his prey in the dead of night. In Siberia's harsh Irkutsk, terror wore the guise of salvation. An ambulance doctor, entrusted with saving lives, instead wielded death as his tool, betraying the very oath sworn to protect. In Vitebsk, another nightmare brewed, darkening the quiet Belarusian city with fear and suspicion. And then, from the industrial heart of Rostov, emerged the most infamous, a monster whose name would echo internationally, Andrei Chikatilo. His reign of terror unfolded with breathtaking savagery, leaving a nation horrified and helpless. Within this backdrop of fear and silence, the rise of each killer seemed inevitable, a grim reminder that evil is never confined by borders, and that no society is immune to its darkest shadows. No one could predict where or when the next such creature would emerge, and when they did, stopping them seemed a hopeless task. All that remained was a fragile, desperate hope that these monsters would never come near us. He played with his victims like a twisted puppeteer, a cruel artist of suffering. Sometimes he would pull a child's cap or a piece of cloth over their head, watching in cold silence as they struggled for breath, their bodies fighting against the invisible noose tightening around their existence. The darkness around him became a theater of torment, where fear and agony danced silently beneath the surface. In this place, a grim canvas was painted with the blood of at least 4 victims, a haunting reminder etched onto every cold, lifeless surface. Each stain whispered the tale of innocence stolen, of childhood shattered forever. Now, victims, we ask you to look closely. Study the faces set before you. Do any awakened memories buried deep in the recesses of your mind? Does one face resemble the shadow you glimpsed in your nightmares? The figure you describe behind closed doors during the darkest hours of investigation? You hold the power to demand more, a turn, a stand, a step forward. The truth demands recognition. It was the summer of 1984 at a Soviet pioneer camp, a place meant for laughter and lighthearted play, a sanctuary for the young. But darkness showed no mercy. I was there, standing apart, smoking a cigarette, trapped within the camp's fences that felt more like a cage. A man approached, a vague acquaintance whose presence sent chills down my spine. In that moment, something inside me shattered. Without hesitation, I raised a knife. I plunged it into his flesh repeatedly, driven by forces I could not understand or control. Like predator to prey, I bound his hands swiftly and mercilessly, like tying up frightened hares. The girls nearby trembled, their faces obscured by caps or rags pulled tightly over their heads. And then, as suddenly as he appeared, he vanished into the night. What happened afterward is a blur, a haze of shock and confusion. I ran, desperate for something I could no longer name. The details escaped me like smoke in the wind. This was only the beginning of horrors yet to come. When they found Andrei, his body revealed no major wounds, except for a deep groove around his neck, the cruel mark of a rope tightened in violence. It was a grim scar, telling its own silent story. At that moment, no one considered that the killer might have been inexperienced, careless enough to leave a boy alive amid his deadly frenzy. But that survival was not mercy. It was a mistake the killer would never repeat. Spring of 1986 saw the arrival of another boy named Andrei, full of youthful hope and energy. He traveled to his grandparents' dacha in the quiet Moscow suburbs, intent on gathering the fresh sap from birch trees, a simple task full of innocent purpose. Every 2 hours as the sun crossed the sky, he pedaled his bicycle through the grove, checking the jars hung carefully on the branches. At 5 in the evening, Andrei set out for his final round and vanished forever. His father found him the next morning, lifeless, ravaged beyond recognition, a victim to the darkest of horrors. The forensic report was brutal and unrelenting. Andrei had been raped before death, his hands bound tightly behind his back, strangled nearly to suffocation. Then came the slit throat, cruel and precise. Finally, his genitals were mutilated and surgically removed, his body desecrated beyond comprehension. On the frame of his bicycle, faint fingerprints were discovered, an awkward clue, but every print was traced back to men with unshakable alibis. The trail went cold. This grim discovery marked a turning point in a nightmare that would soon spiral far beyond the quiet suburbs. A nightmare that would grip an entire nation in fear. That summer, as thousands of boys and girls packed their bags and boarded trains bound for the pioneer camps, the world seemed simple and safe. The carefree laughter of children filling the air, the promise of adventure and friendship waiting behind every tree and cabin. A series of troubling events had quietly unsettled the community, casting long shadows over the idyllic surroundings. Though outward appearances remained unchanged, a somber tension lingered in quiet conversations and in the determined efforts of local authorities. The camps continued to operate, upheld by the hope and trust of parents who believed their children were protected by the innocence of youth. Yet beneath this surface, concerned investigators worked tirelessly, piecing together clues and following leads in a complex and delicate inquiry. Near camp after camp, an unknown figure appeared, drawing quiet attention. The investigators realized they faced a careful and methodical adversary, someone who moved beyond the reach of ordinary suspicion. In June, a 12-year-old boy named Andrei went missing from a pioneer camp in the Odintsovo district outside Moscow. His disappearance sparked a broad and intensive search effort fueled by the dedication of law enforcement and the anguish of his family and community. Though the investigation uncovered difficult truths, the focus remained on bringing justice and closure, supporting those affected and ensuring the safety of all children in the camps and surrounding areas. At the scene of the crime, witnesses whispered about a mysterious young man, an eerie presence standing apart from the crowd. He didn't blend in. He knelt near a tree, carving its bark with a small, sharp knife. His movements were deliberate, almost ritualistic, as if the act itself held some dark meaning. Many people saw him that day, but when questioned later, no one could recall his face clearly. His features were blurred by fear and confusion, slipping through the grasp of memory like smoke. Then came a witness who would change the course of the investigation, though not always for the better. A friend of the last victim, shaken by grief and perhaps influenced by the stories of criminals he had read in books, gave a description that misled law enforcement for years. He claimed to have seen the boy walking with a man, an older figure marked by a distinctive tattoo on his right arm, a coiling serpent paired with the word Fisher inked in bold letters. Although the story wavered, law enforcement had no choice but to pursue every lead. Across the vast Soviet Union, thousands of men named or nicknamed Fisher were investigated. No alibi went unchecked, no past ignored. Each man was questioned about their whereabouts and their behavior. Their personal histories were dissected with the same cold precision as the victims' bodies. New witnesses came forward, each describing a different version of the shadowy figure. Conflicting accounts piled up like a mountain of smoke, obscuring the truth beneath layers of confusion and doubt. Time slipped away as the investigation spun in circles, chasing phantoms born of fear and desperation. Years passed and the real murderer remained free, concealed within the shadows. The name Fisher became a shadow that haunted the streets of Moscow and the surrounding region. A specter whispered in fear by parents who would not dare leave their children alone, even for a moment. Mothers clutched their children tightly, eyes scanning every stranger on the street. Doors and windows were locked earlier than ever before. The simple act of sending a child to the pioneer camp became an act of courage and prayer. Behind closed doors, mothers crossed themselves quietly, appealing to a God who had, until recently, been forbidden. They begged silently for protection for their innocent sons and daughters, hoping beyond hope that the monsters lurking in the darkness would pass them by. This climate of fear and suspicion gripped the city like an unseen hand. The rumors surrounding Fisher grew, half-truths, whispers, and dark legends spreading faster than any official word. No one really knew who he was, where he might strike next, or what twisted desires fueled his madness. And so, the city lived in a fragile balance, always one step away from panic, watching, waiting, fearing. In September 1989, this fear became reality when 10-year-old Sergey disappeared from the village of Kryukovo in the Odintsovo district. The local police acted swiftly, questioning everyone, distant relatives, neighbors, even families from far-flung provinces, searching for any clue, any sign of the boy's whereabouts. But Sergey was nowhere to be found. The last person to see him was a neighborhood boy, waiting with Sergey at the bus stop. Sergey planned to travel to Moscow that day, but somehow vanished before boarding the bus. Meticulous investigations followed. Every bus driver was questioned, every ticket inspector cross-examined, yet no one saw Sergey board any vehicle. Even the nearest train station revealed no trace. A nationwide search was launched, a desperate attempt to find the boy, to stem the rising tide of terror. A year after Sergey's disappearance, in the thick, unforgiving forest that skirted the outskirts of the city, investigators made a grim discovery. Scattered across the underbrush lay the dismembered remains of the young boy, fragments of a soul brutally torn apart. His organs were gone, devoured by wild animals. His bones, chewed and gnawed upon, intertwined with the earth beneath the fallen leaves. The sheer savagery of his final moments shocked everyone involved, leaving a chilling impression that would not soon fade. Forensic experts studied the remains, piecing together the darkest truths from what little evidence remained. The skills required to carve a body so meticulously suggested a killer far beyond the average, someone with an anatomical knowledge or experience in butchery. Suspicion quickly fell upon those who worked closely with animals and anatomy. Hospitals were canvassed. Slaughterhouses became grim points of interest. Workers were questioned extensively, especially those dismissed in the preceding decade. Among the places scrutinized, one site drew particular attention: Moscow's Horse Factory Number 1, a sprawling industrial complex devoted to breeding and caring for horses, with a network of stables, barns, and workshops. Though the factory's workers insisted no one among them possessed the twisted desires or dark skills matching the killer's profile, the investigation could not ignore the possibility. Men who showed little interest in women but seemed to effortlessly connect with boys, an unsettling anomaly in a place meant for care and labor. The case took on a new grim intensity as detectives began to chart the killer's shadowy movements. The killer's acts grew more brutal, his appetite for cruelty deepening, but so too did his caution and cunning. The investigation was a race against time, and against a predator who always seemed one step ahead, vanishing into Moscow's vast wilderness before anyone could catch him. The sprawling grounds of Moscow's horse factory number 1 were far from the safe haven they appeared to be. Beneath the steady rhythm of hooves and the routine care of majestic horses, a darker presence stirred, a shadow that grew more sinister with every passing day. In August 1991, tragedy struck again. Another boy named Sergey disappeared. This time, his body was found skinned, his hide salted and discarded miles away from his lifeless frame. The gruesome display was a macabre message, signaling the killer's descent into depravity and his ruthlessness in concealing evidence. The timing of Sergey's disappearance was no coincidence. It unfolded amidst the chaos of the 1991 Moscow coup, a time when the city was under lockdown, patrolled heavily by troops, and movement was tightly controlled. The killer faced unprecedented obstacles, making his actions even more brazen. Victims' bodies were found clustered within a roughly triangular area, later coined the Triangle of Horror, with points at Zvenigorod City, the village of Uspenskoye, and Gorky 10. It was inside this grim border that the predator moved with calculated cruelty. New evidence suggested the killer savored his torment, keeping victims alive for hours, fearful neither of discovery nor capture. He likely had access to a vehicle, a garage, and even a basement, a lair where unspeakable acts were committed away from prying eyes. Yet finding this single car among the dense Moscow woods was a nearly impossible task. Investigators turned to unusual clues, a salted hide preserved with unrefined feed salt, hinting the murderer drew supplies from agricultural sources. The possibility of cannibalism emerged, darkening the case further. Mental institutions, homeless populations, and anyone fitting the profile were scrutinized. Still, no suspect repeatedly surfaced. Once again, the horse factory became the focal point. Authorities descended, searching for a tall, middle-aged man with blood type AB, possessing anatomical knowledge, access to feed salt, and a vehicle. This man was not a local. He had official Moscow registration but evaded capture by concealing his true nature. The nightmare reached its darkest crescendo with the discovery of 3 boys, Yura, Denis, and Vladik, lying together in a forgotten clearing deep within the woods. They were the 11th, 12th, and 13th victims of a merciless killer, their bodies bearing the scars of prolonged torture and cruel mutilation. The scene was one of grotesque horror, the boys' lifeless forms dumped side by side, their flesh horrifically disfigured, their pain etched into every jagged wound. Unlike previous killings, these bodies were left barely concealed, smeared with dirt but not hidden, the killer's growing arrogance, a malicious message carved into the earth itself. Near the victims lay a simple cross and a worn icon, beloved keepsakes of Vladik, silent witnesses to his fading soul. A hidden bottle was found, half buried, containing a crude note, an unintended beacon that would later prove crucial in the murder investigation. Forensic teams traced the boys' recent movements. All 3 came from the sprawling settlement near the horse factory number 1 and frequently traveled together to Moscow's arcade halls, searching for escape in the flashing lights and fleeting joys. Often, they were driven there by Sergey Golovkin, a tall, soft-spoken man with an affinity for horses, a man whose reputation as a model worker and dedicated communist masked a sinister truth. His disinterest in women was notable, and his ability to connect with boys with unsettling ease raised quiet suspicions. 2 weeks after the bodies were found, Golovkin was arrested and reluctantly led investigators to the burial site of the 3 boys, located thanks to the hidden note inside the bottle. During interviews, Golovkin spoke with unnerving calm, confessing in grisly detail how he mutilated and killed the boys. He described cutting throats with razors, dismembering bodies with chilling precision, and conducting twisted experiments. trying to relive the tortures reportedly endured by World War II partisans. He told of forcing boys to stand on stools and kicking them away before hanging them, draining their blood into a battered baby bathtub, an image that sent shivers through the investigators. Dennis, the last victim, endured torture for nearly 12 hours in Golovkin's grim basement lair, a chamber of pain filled with fire, wire branding, and unspeakable violation. Behind every troubled individual lies a complex and fractured mind, a labyrinth of pain, denial, and inner turmoil. Sergey Golovkin's story was no exception. From a young age, Golovkin exhibited signs of deep emotional distress and isolation. His struggles with social connection and internal conflict shaped a life marked by darkness and confusion. Over time, difficult thoughts and feelings took hold, creating a challenging path for those around him to understand or reach. Unlike impulsive actors, Golovkin's behavior was marked by a calculated detachment. His inner world held harrowing visions, an unsettling refuge that ultimately led him toward tragic actions. Despite the gravity of his crimes, Golovkin exhibited moments of contradictory humanity, confessing to his actions with a disturbing sense of remorse and distorted attempts at seeking forgiveness. His complex relationship with life was further revealed through early troubling behaviors toward animals and a fascination with the boundary between life and death. His transfer to general population in prison brought out an eerie blend of bitterness and dark humor, highlighting the troubled nature of his mind. Over time, he made several attempts to end his own life, underscoring the profound torment he experienced. Now in the quiet and cold spaces of incarceration, Golovkin awaits the outcome of justice, a somber reminder of the profound impact of trauma on the human mind and those around him.